Hi, I'm Diana. 3 days ago, my mother cornered me at her charity gala and whispered that I was an embarrassment to the Carter name. She said it with a smile, the way she always does, so no one else could tell she was cutting me down. My sister stood beside her, nodding in agreement, both of them looking at me like I was a stain they couldn't scrub out. What they didn't know was that in 72 hours, the tech acquisition I'd been working on for 4 years would go public, and my name would be attached to a platform with 400 million active users. By the time the press release hit, they weren't just shocked. They were scrambling to rewrite history, and I had every receipt to prove they were lying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The September rain came down in sheets as I pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' estate on Mercer Island. The kind of rain that makes Seattle feel like it's wrapped in gray wool, heavy and oppressive. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, watching the wipers drag water across the windshield in slow, rhythmic strokes. The house loomed ahead, all stone and glass and perfectly manicured hedges, the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines with captions about modern luxury and timeless elegance. I'd grown up here, but it had never felt like home. I checked my phone one last time before heading inside. 3 unread messages from my development team, 2 investor updates I'd review later tonight, and a calendar reminder that made my stomach twist. Carter Family Gala, 7 o'clock. I'd been dreading this for weeks, but there was no getting out of it. My mother had made that abundantly clear during our last phone call, the one where she'd used her particular brand of guilt disguised as concern to ensure my attendance. We haven't seen you in months, Diana. People are starting to ask questions. You know how that looks. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and made a run for the front door, my flat splashing through puddles I couldn't avoid. The door swung open before I could reach for the handle, and there stood Natalie, my older sister, dressed in a charcoal blazer and cream blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her makeup was flawless, the kind of polished perfection she'd mastered years ago. She looked me up and down with the faint disappointment she'd been perfecting since we were teenagers. "You're wet," she said, as if I hadn't noticed. "It's raining," I replied, stepping past her into the marble foyer. She closed the door behind me with a soft click. "Mom's in the sitting room. She wants to go over seating arrangements before tonight. Try to look presentable, okay? This is a big night for her." I bit back the response forming on my tongue and forced a neutral expression. I'd learned years ago that arguing with Natalie was like trying to convince a wall to move. She'd already decided who I was in her mind, the younger sister who never quite measured up, and nothing I said would change that. I followed her through the hallway, past family photos that told a carefully curated story. Natalie at her college graduation, beaming in her cap and gown. Natalie cutting the ribbon at her marketing agency's grand opening. My parents at various charity events, shaking hands with local politicians and business leaders. There was one photo of me, tucked in the corner, from my high school graduation. I was smiling, but it looked forced, like I knew even then that I didn't quite belong in this narrative they were building. The sitting room was exactly as I remembered it. Cream-colored furniture arranged with mathematical precision, abstract art on the walls that cost a fortune but said nothing, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lake Washington. My mother, Valerie, sat on the sofa with a leather-bound planner open on her lap, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as we entered, and her expression shifted through several micro-emotions before settling on restrained politeness. "Diana," she said, closing the planner. "You made it." "Traffic wasn't bad," I said, even though she hadn't asked. She stood and walked over to me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She reached out and adjusted the collar of my jacket, a gesture that might have looked maternal to an outsider but felt like an inspection. "This is what you're wearing tonight?" I glanced down at my black pants and simple gray sweater. "It's a gala, not a coronation." Natalie snorted softly from her position by the window. Valerie shot her a look that said not now, then returned her attention to me. "The Fairmont Olympic, Diana. The mayor will be there. Several city council members. This isn't some casual dinner party. I'll change before we leave, I said, knowing it would end the conversation faster than defending my wardrobe choices. Good. Valerie returned to the sofa and opened her planner again. Now, about seating. I've placed you at table 12. It's near the back, but you'll be with some lovely people. The Hendersons are very sweet, and Patricia Warner just got back from volunteering in Costa Rica. You'll have plenty to talk about. Table 12. I didn't need to ask where Natalie would be sitting. She'd be at table 2 or 3, close enough to the stage to be seen, far enough to maintain an air of humility. My father would be at the head table with my mother, smiling his practiced smile and making small talk with donors who wrote checks with too many zeros. Sounds great, I said, my voice flat. Natalie turned from the window, her arms crossed. Are you even going to try tonight, Diana? Or are you just going to sit in the corner on your phone like you always do? I meet her gaze without flinching. I'll be present. Isn't that what you wanted? Valerie held up a hand before Natalie could respond. Girls, please. Tonight is important, and I won't have you two bickering like children. Diana, your sister has a point. You've been so distant lately. People notice these things. They wonder why you're never at family events, why you're always making excuses. I work, I said simply. Natalie laughed, sharp and bitter. Work. Right. Freelance web design from your apartment. That's not work, Diana. That's a hobby. The words stung more than I wanted to admit, not because they were true, but because of how little they knew. How little they'd ever bothered to ask. I'd stopped trying to explain what I did years ago, after the 100th time my mother had changed the subject or Natalie had made some dismissive comment about computers being a phase. It was easier to let them believe what they wanted, to let them think I was directionless and unmotivated. It kept them from asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Valerie cleared her throat, a sound that meant the discussion was over. We need to leave here by 6:30. That gives you 2 hours to get ready. Diana, there's a dress in the guest room closet. I picked it up last week. It should fit. I didn't ask you to do that, I said quietly. I know. But I did anyway. Consider it a gift. There was no point in arguing. I nodded and excused myself, climbing the stairs to the second floor where the guest room waited. The house felt enormous and empty, despite the 3 of us being in it. I wondered if it had always felt this way, or if the distance had grown over time, each small dismissal and casual insult adding another layer of separation between us. The guest room was decorated in soft blues and whites, sterile and impersonal, like a hotel room designed for people passing through. The dress hung in the closet, still wrapped in plastic from the boutique. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. Navy blue, knee-length, tasteful and boring. Exactly the kind of thing my mother would choose. I laid it on the bed and sat down beside it, pulling out my phone. 2 new messages from my lead developer, Marcus, asking about a server issue that had been resolved an hour ago. One from my business manager, Claire, confirming that the press embargo would lift Monday morning at 9. 3 days. 72 hours until everything changed. I typed out a quick response to Claire. All set on my end. Let's make sure legal has everything locked down. No surprises. Her reply came almost instantly. Already done. You ready for this? I stared at the question, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Was I ready? I'd been working toward this moment for 4 years, building something from nothing in the dark hours between midnight and dawn, coding until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, learning to pitch investors while my family thought I was wasting my life. I'd sacrificed relationships and sleep and any semblance of a normal social life to make this happen. And now it was 72 hours away from becoming real, from becoming public, from becoming undeniable. Ready as I'll ever be, I typed back. I set the phone down and looked at the dress again. Tonight, I'd put it on and smile and sit at table 12 and let my family believe what they'd always believed. That I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't get her life together, the daughter who dropped out of business school and never amounted to anything. Let them have their narrative for 3 more days. After that, it wouldn't matter what they believed. The rain had stopped by the time we left for the hotel, leaving the city glistening under streetlights. I sat in the back seat of my mother's Mercedes while she and Natalie discussed seating arrangements and auction items and which donors needed extra attention. My father had driven separately, some excuse about a late meeting that no one questioned because we'd all stopped expecting him to be fully present years ago. The Fairmont Olympic rose before us, grand and imposing, its facade lit up against the darkening sky. Valets in burgundy uniforms rushed to open doors as cars pulled up to the entrance, and guests in evening wear streamed through the revolving doors into the lobby. My mother handed her keys to a valet with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and we followed the crowd inside. The ballroom was already filling up, round tables draped in ivory linens and topped with elaborate centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. A string quartet played softly from a corner stage, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over the assembled guests who stood in clusters, laughing and networking and being seen. Valerie was immediately absorbed into a conversation with a woman wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country. Natalie drifted toward a group of young professionals near the bar, her business card probably already in her hand. I stood near the entrance, feeling the familiar weight of invisibility settle over me. This was how it always went. They'd disappear into their respective circles, and I'd find my assigned table and wait for the evening to end. I made my way to table 12, weaving between guests who didn't notice me. The Hendersons weren't there yet, and neither was Patricia Warner. I sat down and smoothed the navy dress over my knees, grateful for the relative anonymity of the back corner. From here, I could see the whole room but remain largely unseen, which suited me perfectly. A waiter appeared at my elbow with a tray of champagne flutes. I shook my head. "Just water, please." He nodded and disappeared. I pulled out my phone, more out of habit than necessity, and scrolled through emails I'd already read. My mother would have a fit if she saw me on my phone, but she was 3 tables away, deep in conversation with the mayor, and unlikely to notice. The ballroom continued to fill, the noise level rising with each passing minute. I watched Natalie hold court near the silent auction tables, gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a circle of admirers. She'd always been good at this, the performance of socializing, the careful cultivation of connections that might prove useful later. I'd never mastered it, never wanted to, really. The effort required to maintain that kind of facade exhausted me just thinking about it. Diana Carter? I looked up to find a man in his 50s standing beside my table, smiling with the kind of warmth that seemed genuine. Patricia's husband, Henry Henderson, if I remembered correctly. We met last year at your mother's garden party. Right, I said, standing to shake his hand. Good to see you again. He gestured to the empty chair beside me. Mind if I sit? Patricia's running late, as usual. Please. He settled into the chair with a slight groan. These events get longer every year, I swear. But Valerie does incredible work with the foundation, so we keep showing up. She's dedicated, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. And what about you? What have you been up to? Still doing that computer work? Something like that. He waited for me to elaborate, and when I didn't, he shifted topics to something safer. The Seahawks' recent performance, the unusually warm September, anything to fill the silence. I offered polite responses, the kind of surface-level engagement that kept conversations moving without revealing anything real. Patricia arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and apologetic, followed by an older couple whose names I immediately forgot. The table filled up with strangers making small talk, and I settled into the rhythm of nodding and smiling and saying just enough to seem present without drawing attention. The program began with my mother taking the stage, radiant in a burgundy gown that probably cost more than my car. She thanked everyone for coming, praised the foundation's work over the past year, and introduced a video montage of the families they'd helped. It was moving and well-produced, and I found myself genuinely impressed despite everything. Whatever else could be said about Valerie Carter, she was effective when she wanted to be. Then came the speeches. A city councilwoman talked about community investment. A local business owner shared a story about growing up in poverty and finding support through programs the foundation funded. My father said a few words about the importance of giving back, his voice steady and practiced, hitting all the right notes without conveying any actual emotion. And then my mother returned to the microphone, and I felt my stomach tighten. "Before we continue with tonight's program," she said, her voice warm and intimate despite the microphone, "I want to take a moment to talk about family. Building a legacy isn't just about what we accomplish professionally. It's about the values we pass down, the example we set for the next generation." I watched Natalie straighten in her seat 3 tables away, a small smile playing at her lips. "My daughter Natalie has been an integral part of this foundation's success," Valerie continued. "She's donated her time, her expertise, her energy to making sure our message reaches the people who need to hear it. She's a remarkable woman, and I'm so proud to call her my daughter." The room erupted in applause. Natalie stood and waved, gracious and humble, soaking in the recognition like she'd been waiting for it her whole life. My hands remained in my lap, unmoving. Valerie waited for the applause to die down before continuing. "Family means supporting each other, even when it's difficult. It means showing up, being present, contributing to something larger than ourselves. It means putting aside our own interests for the greater good." Her eyes swept the room, and for just a moment, they landed on me. The message was clear, even if no one else understood it. This is what success looks like, Diana. This is what you're not. The program moved on to the auction, but I'd stopped paying attention. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean of whatever optimism had carried me through the door tonight. This was always how it went. Natalie praised, my father acknowledged, me erased. The pattern was so familiar it had stopped surprising me years ago, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about the restroom, and slipped out of the ballroom into the quieter hallway beyond. The hotel corridor was elegantly decorated, plush carpet muffling my footsteps as I walked without direction. I just needed space, air, somewhere I could breathe without feeling the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me. I found a small alcove near the elevators and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. 3 more days. I just had to hold on for 3 more days, and then none of this would matter. They could have their speeches and their recognition and their carefully constructed narrative. I'd have the truth, and the truth would be loud enough that they couldn't ignore it anymore. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, expecting another message from my team, but the name on the screen made me freeze. Uncle Paul. The message was short, just 5 words that sent ice through my veins. "They know about the company." I read it 3 times, my brain refusing to process what it meant. They know. How could they know? The acquisition hadn't been announced. We'd been operating under an NDA for months. Only a handful of people knew the details, and none of them had any connection to my family. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "How?" The response came immediately. "Your father hired someone to look into your finances. Found the LLC registration. Valerie and Natalie have been planning something all week. Thought you should know." The hallway tilted slightly, or maybe that was just me losing my balance. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, forcing air into my lungs. They'd been digging into my life, investigating me like I was some kind of threat. And they'd found something. Not everything, not yet, but enough to know I'd been hiding more than freelance web design work. Another message from Paul. "Be careful tonight. They're going to corner you." I looked back toward the ballroom, toward the warm light and the sound of laughter and applause, and suddenly it all felt like a trap. They'd known before I even arrived tonight. That's why my mother had insisted I come, why she'd laid out that dress, why Natalie had been watching me so carefully. They were setting something up, and I'd walked right into it. I straightened up, shoving my phone back into my clutch. If they wanted to confront me, fine. But they'd do it on my terms, not theirs. I took a deep breath, smoothed down the navy dress I hadn't wanted to wear, and walked back toward the ballroom with my head high. The auction was still going on when I returned, bid numbers being called out and paddles raised in the air. I slipped back to table 12, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might try to engage me in conversation. Patricia Henderson gave me a concerned look, but I smiled and shook my head, a silent everything's fine that we both knew was a lie. I watched my mother from across the room, the way she moved from table to table during the break between auction items, shaking hands and accepting compliments with practiced grace. She was good at this, at making people feel seen and valued, at least when it served her purposes. I'd spent years wishing she'd turn even a fraction of that attention toward me, and then more years learning to stop wishing for impossible things. Natalie joined her after a few minutes, leaning in to whisper something in her ear. Valerie nodded, her expression unreadable from this distance, and then both of them looked directly at me. My pulse kicked up. This was it. Whatever they'd been planning, it was happening now. They made their way through the crowd, and I forced myself to stay seated, to not bolt for the exit like every instinct was screaming at me to do. Running would only make things worse. I'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Valerie reached the table first, her smile bright and false. "Diana, sweetie. Can we talk to you for a moment? Somewhere private?" The Hendersons and the other guests at my table suddenly became very interested in their auction programs. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress again, buying myself a few seconds to prepare. "Sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Natalie gestured toward the hallway I'd just come from. "There's a small meeting room just past the lobby. It'll only take a minute." I followed them out of the ballroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. The meeting room was exactly as Natalie had described, small and windowless, with a conference table and a handful of chairs. My father was already there, sitting at the head of the table with his hands folded in front of him. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like the weight of whatever was about to happen had already exhausted him. Valerie closed the door behind us with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock. "Diana," she began, her tone shifting from public warmth to private business. "We need to talk about what you've been doing." I stayed standing near the door, keeping my options open. "What I've been doing?" Natalie pulled out her phone and set it on the table, screen facing up. "Don't play dumb. We know about Connect Wave. We know you own it. We know there's an acquisition in the works." The name of my company sounded wrong coming out of her mouth, like she'd stolen something that didn't belong to her. I kept my expression neutral, even though my mind was racing. How much did they actually know? And more importantly, what were they planning to do with that information? "I work in tech," I said carefully. "You knew that." Valerie laughed, sharp and cold. "Freelance web design, Diana. That's what you told us. You didn't mention building a social network worth billions of dollars. So now they knew about the valuation too. Uncle Paul had been right. They'd hired someone, probably a private investigator or a forensic accountant, and that person had dug deep enough to find the real story. "I didn't think it was relevant," I said. "Not relevant?" Natalie's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. "You've been lying to us for years. Letting us think you were barely scraping by while you were building a fortune." "I wasn't lying. I just wasn't volunteering information you never asked for." Richard finally spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "Diana, we're your family. We deserve to know about something this significant." "Why?" I met his gaze directly. "So you could tell me I was wasting my time? So Natalie could make another joke about my hobbies? So Mom could ask when I was going to get a real job?" The room went silent. Valerie's jaw tightened, and I knew I'd hit something true. "This isn't about the past," she said finally. "This is about moving forward responsibly. You're young, Diana. You don't have experience managing this kind of wealth or publicity. We want to help you. Help me." The words sounded reasonable, even kind, but I could hear the subtext underneath. Help me meant control me. It meant bringing me back into the fold where they could manage the narrative and take credit and reshape my success into something that reflected well on them. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, but I have advisors. Lawyers. People who've been helping me navigate this from the beginning. Natalie leaned forward. Family advisors, Diana. People who have your best interests at heart. Not strangers who are just taking a percentage. You mean people you can control, I said quietly. Valerie's expression hardened. Watch your tone. We're trying to protect you. From what? From yourself. From making decisions that could damage this family's reputation. Do you have any idea what it's going to look like when this goes public? Valerie Carter's daughter, the one who dropped out of school, suddenly worth billions? People are going to ask questions. They're going to dig into your past, into our past. We need to get ahead of this. And there it was. The real concern wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting them, their image, their carefully curated reputation in Seattle's social circles. My success was a threat because it complicated their story, the one where Natalie was the golden child and I was the cautionary tale. I'm not changing anything, I said firmly. The acquisition is happening. The announcement will go out as planned. You don't get a say in this. Richard stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Diana, please. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I built this company on my own, with my own work and my own vision. You don't get to swoop in at the last minute and claim ownership just because we share DNA. Natalie's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, then looked at Valerie with something I couldn't quite read. My mother nodded slightly, some silent communication passing between them that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We were hoping it wouldn't come to this, Valerie said, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from my childhood, the one she used when negotiations were over and declarations were beginning. But you're leaving us no choice. We've already spoken to an attorney. We're prepared to file a claim against the company. My blood went cold. A claim? On what grounds? Family contribution, Natalie said smoothly. You built this company while living under our roof for years. Using resources we provided. You were on our family's insurance, our phone plan. We have documentation of financial support going back to when you were 22. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. You're going to sue me? We'd rather not, Richard said quietly. But if you refuse to bring us into the business appropriately, we don't have another option. This affects the whole family, Diana. You need to understand that. I looked at each of them in turn. My father, who couldn't meet my eyes. My sister, who looked almost pleased with herself. My mother, whose expression had settled into something cold and determined. They'd planned this. Not just tonight, but probably for days, since the moment they'd discovered what I'd been building. They'd consulted lawyers and gathered documentation and prepared their strategy, all while I'd been naive enough to think I had 3 more days of anonymity. The meeting room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I needed to get out, to think, to figure out what came next. But I couldn't show weakness now. Couldn't let them see how much this had shaken me. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. We're done here. Diana, wait, Richard started, but I was already at the door. I walked out of that meeting room and kept walking, past the ballroom where the auction was still going on, past the lobby with its elegant furniture and expensive art, out into the cool September night where the rain had started up again. I didn't have my coat, didn't have anything except my clutch and my phone and the sick feeling in my stomach that everything I'd worked for was about to be taken away by the people who were supposed to support me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would answer. Uncle Paul picked up on the first ring. I told you to be careful. They're going to sue me, I said, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts. They're claiming family contribution. They want part of the company. There was a long pause. Then his voice, steady and sure. Come to my place. Right now. We need to talk. Uncle Paul's apartment was in Fremont, a neighborhood that felt worlds away from Mercer Island despite being only 20 minutes across the lake. He found out what I knew. I found your evidence, I told her quietly. The box in your apartment. I know about the insurance fraud and Trevor Morrison and everything you discovered. You don't have to explain right now. Just rest. But Vanessa's hand moved weakly, grasping at my sleeve with what little strength she had. Not safe, she whispered. He knows. I told you. He'll come for me again. The fear in her voice was palpable, and I realized she was right to be afraid. Brandon knew that Vanessa had survived long enough to identify him. He had to be calculating his next move, trying to figure out how to silence her permanently before she could give an official statement to the police. I won't let him get near you, I promised. There will be a police officer outside your door. You're going to be protected. Dr. Kim appeared in the doorway. Detective Torres is here. Are you ready for him to come in? I looked at Vanessa, who nodded slightly despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. This was what we needed, the official testimony that would put everything in motion. But I also knew that once she spoke to the detective, there would be no going back, no possibility of handling this quietly or controlling the narrative. Everything would become public, and Brandon would know that we had moved against him. Detective Torres entered the room with the same attentive presence he had demonstrated at the cafe, but now his expression carried additional gravity. He understood, as I did, that what happened in the next few minutes would determine the direction of his investigation. Ms. Harper, I'm Detective Raymond Torres. I know you've been through a terrible ordeal, and I appreciate your willingness to speak with me. Can you tell me what you remember about your attack? Vanessa's voice was stronger now, as if the presence of official authority had given her resolve. Brandon Caldwell. My brother-in-law. He called me, said he needed to meet. Said it was about Nicole, something urgent. The detective was recording on his phone, documenting every word. Where did he ask you to meet? Pinecrest Road. Near the old Miller farm. Said his car broke down there. Asked if I could give him a ride. And you went? I thought Nicole might need help. Thought something happened to her. When I got there, his car was fine. He was waiting. I got out, asked what was wrong. He grabbed me. Vanessa's breathing became labored, the effort of speaking taking its toll. Dr. Kim stepped forward, checking the monitors, but Vanessa waved her away weakly, determined to finish. He said I should have minded my own business. Said I was going to ruin everything. Then he hit me. Kept hitting me. I tried to fight, but he was stronger. He dragged me to the ditch. Left me there. I heard his car drive away. The room was silent except for the beeping of monitors and Vanessa's ragged breathing. Detective Torres stopped the recording and looked at me with an expression that combined professional determination with something that might have been sympathy. Miss Harper, I'm going to need to place your husband under arrest immediately. Given the severity of the attack and the clear premeditation involved, he'll be charged with attempted murder. I want to assure you that we'll also be investigating the other allegations you mentioned regarding insurance fraud. This is now a multi-jurisdictional case. The words should have brought relief, but instead I felt a strange numbness. This was really happening. My marriage was ending not with counseling or mediation but with handcuffs and criminal charges. The man I had built a life with was going to be arrested for trying to murder my sister, and I was the one who had helped make that arrest possible by collecting evidence and bringing it to the authorities. He'll lawyer up immediately, I said. He has resources and connections. He'll try to make bail and disappear. We'll argue for remand without bail given the flight risk and the severity of the charges. But Ms. Harper, I need to ask you directly. Do you feel safe? Is there any reason to believe your husband might pose a threat to you? The question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. Brandon had tried to kill Vanessa because she knew too much. I now knew everything Vanessa had known, plus more. I had found her evidence, compiled additional documentation, and was actively working with the police to ensure his arrest. If he was capable of attempted murder once, what would stop him from trying again? I don't think I should go home, I said quietly. Not until he's in custody. Detective Torres nodded. I agree. We'll coordinate the arrest for this evening. I'd recommend you stay somewhere he can't easily locate you and that you don't communicate with him until after he's been taken into custody. Do you have somewhere safe to go? She's staying with me, Melissa said firmly. And I live in a secure building with cameras and a doorman. He won't be able to get to her there. After Detective Torres left to coordinate the arrest, I stayed with Vanessa for a few more minutes. Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling her back towards sleep. I squeezed her hand gently. You were so brave, investigating him and trying to protect me. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner. Not your fault, Vanessa whispered. He was good at hiding. But you found it. Finished what I started. She fell asleep still holding my hand, and I sat there watching her breathe, grateful that she was alive and terrified of everything that was about to unfold. Dr. Kim arranged for a police officer to be stationed outside Vanessa's room around the clock, someone who would check identification of anyone trying to enter and who had orders to prevent Brandon from accessing her under any circumstances. Melissa and I left the hospital and drove back to her apartment in silence heavy with anticipation. We knew that somewhere across the city, Detective Torres and his team were preparing to arrest Brandon. I imagined them getting warrants, coordinating with other agencies, planning the logistics of taking into custody a man who had money and influence and every reason to resist. My phone rang around 7 that evening. Brandon's name appeared on the screen, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But then I realized this might be the last conversation we ever had as husband and wife, the final words before everything became lawyer statements and court proceedings. I answered, my voice carefully neutral. Hello. Nicole, where are you? I went by Melissa's building, but the doorman wouldn't let me up. We need to talk. The fact that he had gone to Melissa's apartment sent a chill through me. He was looking for me, trying to find me, and I had no way of knowing what he would have done if he had succeeded. I told you I needed some space. Why can't you respect that? Because this is ridiculous. His voice carried an edge now, frustration breaking through the veneer of concerned husband. Your sister is in the hospital, and instead of us dealing with this together as a married couple, you're hiding from me like I've done something wrong. What exactly do you think I did? The question was designed to gauge how much I knew, to determine whether I had discovered his involvement in Vanessa's attack. I could hear the calculation behind it, the careful word choice of someone trying to extract information while revealing nothing. I don't want to have this conversation over the phone. Then let me come to wherever you are. Or meet me somewhere neutral. A restaurant, a coffee shop, anywhere you feel comfortable. We can't fix this if we're not even communicating. In the background of his call, I heard a sound that might have been a doorbell. Then voices, male and authoritative. Brandon's attention shifted away from the phone. Hold on a second, Nicole. Someone's at the door. I heard him walking, heard the door open, heard Detective Torres's voice saying words I had been waiting to hear all day. Brandon Caldwell, I'm Detective Raymond Torres with Riverside Heights Police Department. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Brandon's voice came through the phone, sharp with panic and anger. What? This is insane. Nicole, what did you do? Then the line went dead, and I sat there holding my silent phone, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me like a physical force. My husband had been arrested. The man I had shared a life with, the person I had trusted completely, was being taken into custody because I had helped build the case against him. Melissa put her arm around my shoulders. You did the right thing. He tried to kill your sister. He's been murdering elderly people for money. This isn't about your marriage ending. This is about stopping a dangerous criminal. I knew she was right intellectually, but emotionally I was struggling to process the enormity of what had just transpired. Less than a week ago, my biggest concern had been whether to repaint the guest bedroom or replace the carpets. Now I was effectively homeless, estranged from my husband, and central to a criminal investigation involving insurance fraud and multiple murders. My phone started ringing again, calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail, assuming they were reporters who had somehow already gotten wind of Brandon's arrest. The local news would pick up the story quickly. Financial executive arrested for attempted murder and insurance fraud made for compelling headlines. Around 9 that evening, Detective Torres called to update me on what had happened after the arrest. Brandon had immediately requested a lawyer and refused to answer any questions. They had searched the house and found additional evidence connecting him to the insurance scheme, including correspondence with Trevor Morrison that explicitly outlined their arrangement. "We've also issued a warrant for Trevor Morrison's arrest," Detective Torres said. "And we're coordinating with the State Insurance Commission and federal authorities because this crosses multiple jurisdictions. Your husband is being held without bail pending arraignment." The judge agreed that he poses both a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. "What about the woman?" I asked. "Veronica Ashford. Is she involved in this?" "We're investigating her potential role. At minimum, she seems to have known about the affair, but we're trying to determine if she had knowledge of the criminal activity. That's still unfolding." After hanging up with the detective, I finally allowed myself to feel the full emotional weight of everything. I cried not just for the end of my marriage, but for the person I had thought Brandon was, for the future we had planned together that had been built on lies, for the elderly people who had died so he could profit, for my sister who had nearly died trying to protect me from the truth. Melissa held me while I cried, not offering platitudes or empty reassurances, just being present in the way that true friends are during the worst moments of your life. When I finally stopped crying, she made tea and we sat on her couch in silence, both of us processing the rapid sequence of events that had transformed everything. "What happens now?" I asked eventually. "Now you rebuild. You figure out who you are separate from this marriage and separate from what Brandon did. You help the police build their case. You make sure justice is served. And then you move forward." The next morning brought the media attention I had been dreading. Brandon's arrest was front-page news in the Riverside Heights Tribune, complete with his professional headshot and a detailed account of the charges against him. My name appeared in the article as both his wife and the sister of his victim, turning me overnight into a public figure in a drama I never wanted any part of. My phone continued to ring with calls from reporters requesting interviews. I ignored all of them, focusing instead on the practical matters that required attention. I needed to find a lawyer of my own, someone who could help me navigate the divorce proceedings and ensure I wasn't held liable for any of Brandon's financial crimes. I needed to secure my own finances, changing passwords and account access to prevent Brandon from draining resources out of spite or desperation. Most importantly, I needed to protect the evidence Vanessa had collected and the additional documentation I had compiled. I made multiple copies of everything, storing them in different locations and with different people, ensuring that even if Brandon's lawyers tried to suppress or destroy evidence, we would have backup copies that could be produced in court. Kevin, the forensic accountant, reached out to offer his services as an expert witness when the case went to trial. He had continued tracing the money trail and had uncovered even more victims than we initially thought. The full scope of Brandon's crimes was staggering. At least 9 elderly clients had died under suspicious circumstances, with life insurance payouts totaling more than $8 million funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts. "This is one of the most sophisticated fraud schemes I've encountered," Kevin told me during a phone call. "Your sister must have been incredibly thorough in her investigation to have uncovered as much as she did. The insurance companies missed all of this because each individual claim looked legitimate. It was only when you viewed the pattern across multiple companies and multiple years that the scheme became visible." I thought about Vanessa spending months conducting her secret investigation, following Brandon, documenting his meetings, analyzing financial records, all while pretending everything was normal at family dinners and holiday gatherings. The courage that must have required, the discipline to keep gathering evidence even as she discovered the true extent of his crimes, left me in awe of my younger sister. Use a public network, cover your tracks. If this goes to court, you don't want them claiming you hacked into their systems. I won't be hacking anything. I was added to that account legitimately years ago. But I'll be careful. Paul stood and walked to a desk in the corner, returning with an old laptop I'd never seen before. Use this. It's not connected to anything personal, no accounts logged in. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here that has public Wi-Fi. Go there, do what you need to do, then wipe the browser history. I took the laptop, surprised by how readily he was helping me. Why are you doing this? Because Valerie has been controlling people through information and perception my entire life, and I'm tired of watching her do it to you. You built something real, Diana. Don't let her take that away from you. The coffee shop was nearly empty at this hour, just a few students hunched over textbooks and one person reading a paperback in the corner. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want and settled at a table far from the windows, opening Paul's laptop with hands that weren't quite steady. The Family Cloud login screen appeared, familiar and innocuous. I entered the credentials I'd memorized years ago, half expecting them to have changed the password. But the system let me in without resistance, and suddenly I was looking at folders I recognized. Family photos. Tax documents. House records. And there, near the bottom, a folder I'd never noticed before labeled estate planning. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of files, PDFs with names like Carter Family Trust Amendment and Asset Distribution Strategy. I opened the most recent one, dated 3 days ago, and started reading. The document was dense with legal language, but certain phrases jumped out. Collaborative family enterprise. Shared resources and support structure. Material contribution to dependent adult child's business ventures. They were building a narrative that painted my success as a family effort, something made possible only through their continued support and guidance. I scrolled down, my stomach twisting with each paragraph. They documented every instance of financial help they'd provided since I turned 18. The insurance coverage they'd maintained until I was 24. The cell phone plan I'd been on until last year. The $3,000 my father had transferred to my account when my car needed repairs 2 years ago, money I'd paid back within 6 months but that they were now characterizing as seed funding for my business. It was meticulous and comprehensive and completely dishonest in its framing. They were taking normal family support, the kind of help any parent might provide to an adult child finding their footing, and repackaging it as investment in a business venture. And they'd been working on this for at least 3 days, which meant Paul had been right. They'd started planning the moment they discovered what I'd built. I downloaded the file to a flash drive Paul had given me, then kept searching. Another folder caught my attention, this one labeled Media Strategy. Inside were draft press releases, each one carefully worded to emphasize family unity and shared success. Valerie and Richard Carter are proud to announce their daughter Diana's remarkable achievement in the tech sector, made possible through years of family support and encouragement. There were talking points too, bullet lists of phrases to use in interviews. We always knew Diana had potential. As a family, we invested in her dream. This success reflects our family's values of innovation and perseverance. Each one made my skin crawl because they were all technically true but fundamentally false. They had believed in me, just not in any way that mattered. I found emails next, correspondence between my mother and someone named Gregory Walsh whose signature identified him as a family law attorney. The thread went back 11 days, starting with a brief inquiry about intellectual property rights and evolving into detailed discussions of legal precedent for family contribution claims. Walsh seemed cautiously optimistic about their chances, citing several cases where adult children had been required to share business proceeds with parents who'd provided support during the company's early stages. But he'd also noted weaknesses in their position. The fact that I'd moved out years ago. The lack of any written agreement establishing their role as investors. The clear separation between my personal life and my business operations. He'd recommended they pursue a settlement rather than actual litigation, suggesting that the threat of a lawsuit might be enough to bring me to the negotiation table. So that's what tonight had been about. Not a genuine attempt to work together, but a strategic opening move. They'd cornered me in that meeting room, presented their demands, and expected me to fold immediately rather than risk public family drama that could damage the acquisition. I kept digging, finding more files that painted an increasingly clear picture. Natalie had created a detailed timeline of my movements over the past 4 years, noting when I'd visited the family home and what I'd been working on during those visits. She'd somehow obtained records of my LinkedIn activity, tracking when I'd made connections with potential investors and advisors. It was surveillance masquerading as concerned family documentation. The most damning file was a spreadsheet titled Valuation and Distribution. They'd calculated the acquisition price, estimated my net worth post-sale, and divided it into percentages. 40% for me, 25% for Natalie as compensation for her marketing expertise that had apparently influenced my work despite us barely speaking for 3 years, 20% for my parents as founders' compensation, and 15% for the family charitable foundation. They'd literally itemized how they planned to carve up my life's work without ever asking if I agreed. I sat back from the laptop, feeling sick. This wasn't just opportunistic. It was predatory. They'd seen my success as something to be harvested, a resource to be divided among themselves according to their own calculations of worth and contribution. And they'd done it all while maintaining the facade of concerned family members who just wanted to help. My coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, needing something to do with my hands while my mind raced. The acquisition was supposed to close in 3 weeks, pending final regulatory approval. If they filed their claim before then, it could delay or even derail the entire deal. The buyers wouldn't want to touch a company embroiled in family legal disputes, and my investors would panic at the uncertainty. I had to move faster than they did. Had to get documentation of my own that proved the company was solely mine, built without their involvement or support in any material way. And I needed leverage, something that would make them reconsider their strategy. I looked back at the laptop screen, at the folders full of their careful plans and calculated manipulations. And then I started downloading everything. Every file, every email, every draft press release and legal memo. If they wanted to play this game, I'd make sure I understood all the rules first. The flash drive was nearly full by the time I finished. I cleared the browser history like Paul had instructed, closed the laptop, and sat in the quiet coffee shop while dawn started to lighten the sky outside. Somewhere across the city, my family was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in their plan and their right to claim what I'd built. They had no idea I'd just taken their entire playbook. I drove back to my apartment in Capitol Hill as the city woke up around me. Early morning joggers passed on the sidewalks, and delivery trucks made their rounds to restaurants preparing for the breakfast rush. Normal people doing normal things while my life balanced on the edge of something I couldn't quite name. Not quite war, not quite betrayal, but something that encompassed both and more. My apartment was small and cluttered, the opposite of my parents' pristine estate. Dirty coffee mugs sat in the sink, and papers covered my kitchen table, half-finished code snippets and business projections mixed with takeout menus. I'd spent so much time building the company that I'd barely built a life around it, and looking at the space now, I felt the weight of that choice. I made fresh coffee and opened my laptop, the real one, and started going through the files I'd copied. In the bright morning light, they looked even worse than they had in the coffee shop. This was my family, people I'd known my entire life, and they'd been plotting to take everything from me while smiling to my face at a charity gala. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my lead developer. Emergency call in an hour? Server issues in the EU cluster. I typed back quickly. I'll be there. Everything under control? Mostly. Just need your sign-off on the scaling approach. Another message came in before I could respond, this one from Claire, my business manager. Checking in. Press team wants to review the announcement draft one more time before we lock it. Can you look at the revisions by Monday? Monday. 2 days away. The acquisition would go public the following morning, and my life would change in ways I still couldn't fully comprehend. But now that change came with a shadow, my family's threat hanging over everything like smoke. I need to talk to you today, I typed to Claire. Can you come by my place this afternoon? It's important. Her response was immediate. Absolutely. 2 p.m. work? Perfect. I spent the next 3 hours in back-to-back video calls, running through technical issues with my development team and reviewing financial projections with my CFO. It was familiar territory, problems I knew how to solve, and for a while I could almost forget about the files sitting on my flash drive. But the moment the calls ended, the anxiety came rushing back. Claire arrived exactly at 2, carrying her ever-present leather portfolio and wearing concern on her face. "What's going on? You sounded stressed." I gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table, pushing aside the clutter to make room. "My family knows about the acquisition. And they're threatening legal action to claim ownership of the company." Her expression went from concerned to alarmed. "On what grounds?" "Family contribution. They're saying they supported me financially while I was building the company and that entitles them to a percentage of the proceeds." Claire set down her portfolio carefully. "Diana, did they actually invest money in Connect Wave? Sign any agreements?" "No. Nothing formal. They helped me out a few times over the years with normal parent stuff. Car repairs, insurance coverage, things like that. But I've been financially independent for years, and they never had any involvement in the business itself." "Then they don't have a case. Any decent lawyer will tell you that." "They have a lawyer. And they've been building documentation for at least 2 weeks." I pulled up the files on my laptop and turned the screen toward her. "This is what they're working with." Claire leaned forward, scrolling through the documents with increasing disbelief. "This is insane. They're trying to reframe normal family support as business investment. That's exactly what they're doing. And if they file before the acquisition closes, it could tank the whole deal." She sat back, processing. "Okay. First thing, we need to get you a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, someone who specializes in this specific intersection of family law and intellectual property. Second, we need to document your side. Every payment you made back to them, every instance where you can prove financial independence, every decision you made without their input or knowledge." "I already have some of that." I pulled out the flash drive. "And I have their entire strategy. I accessed their shared cloud account last night and downloaded everything they've been planning." Claire's eyes widened. "Please tell me you did that legally." "I was an authorized user on the account. They never removed my access." "That's thin, Diana. A good lawyer could argue you exceeded your authorization by downloading confidential legal documents." "I know. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. And now I do." She studied me for a long moment. "You're sure you want to fight this? Because once you start, there's no going back to normal family dinners and holiday photos." "We haven't had normal family dinners in years," I said quietly. "And they made this choice, not me. I built something real, Claire. I'm not going to let them take it just because they're embarrassed they underestimated me." "All right then. Let's figure out our next move." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything, building a timeline that proved my independence and self-sufficiency. I showed her bank statements demonstrating that I'd paid back every dollar they'd given me. I pulled up incorporation documents showing I'd filed everything myself, with my own money for fees. I found emails from early investors that clearly stated they were investing in my vision and my company, with no mention of family involvement. But Claire kept coming back to the same concern. "Even if we can prove you don't owe them anything legally, the threat alone could damage the acquisition. Buyers want clean deals, Diana. If your family goes public with accusations of financial impropriety or family disputes, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty kills deals. So what do I do? Give them what they want? Absolutely not. But we need to neutralize their leverage before they can use it. And that means we need something they want more than money." I thought about my mother's carefully curated reputation, my sister's social media presence that constantly projected an image of family unity and success. Their greatest asset wasn't money or property. It was perception, the way people saw them and the way they saw themselves. What if we make it clear that going public with this hurts them more than it hurts me? I said slowly. Their entire strategy depends on framing this as supportive family involvement. But if people see the documents they've been creating, the calculated way they're trying to carve up my company, it makes them look predatory. Claire tilted her head, considering. "You're talking about mutually assured destruction. You release their files, they look terrible, but your family situation becomes very public. It's already going to be public the moment the acquisition is announced. At least this way, I control the narrative. We'd need to be strategic about it. Not a public dump of documents, but a carefully prepared response if they follow through on their threats. Something your lawyer can present to their lawyer that makes it clear you're not backing down. I nodded, the shape of a plan forming in my mind. And we accelerate the acquisition announcement. If it goes public Monday before they can file anything, it puts them on the defensive. They'd be reacting to news rather than getting ahead of it. That's only 2 days away. Are we ready? The question hung in the air. Was I ready? Ready for my family to see exactly how wrong they'd been about me? Ready for the world to know what I'd built while they'd been dismissing me as a failure? Ready to burn whatever remained of my relationship with my parents and sister? I thought about sitting at table 12, invisible and ignored. I thought about years of backhanded comments and casual cruelty. I thought about that spreadsheet dividing up my life's work like it belonged to them. Yes, I said firmly. We're ready. Move up the announcement to Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'll have my lawyer contact theirs tomorrow with a very clear message about what happens if they proceed with their claim. Claire stood, gathering her things. I'll make the calls. Diana, I know this isn't easy, but for what it's worth, you're doing the right thing. They don't get to take credit for something they never believed in. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment as evening shadows lengthened across the floor. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother and 2 from Natalie. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Whatever they had to say could wait until I had my pieces in position. Instead, I called Uncle Paul. It's me. I need a recommendation for a lawyer. Someone who won't be intimidated by my mother's reputation. I know just the person, he said. Give me an hour. True to his word, Paul texted me contact information for Stephen Kim, an attorney who specialized in tech startups and family business disputes. I called immediately, leaving a detailed voicemail about my situation. He called back 30 minutes later, his voice crisp and businesslike. I've reviewed similar cases, he said after I'd explained everything. Your family's claim is weak legally, but you're right to be concerned about timing. The threat alone can cause problems. I'd like to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning. Can you bring all the documentation you have, both yours and what you obtained from their files? I'll be there, I said. And Diana, he added, his tone softening slightly, what they're doing isn't just legally questionable. It's morally reprehensible. Family should support success, not exploit it. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt since discovering their plan. Not quite hope, but something close to it. Determination, maybe. The certainty that I wasn't going to roll over and let them rewrite history. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I compiled every piece of evidence proving my independence, organized it chronologically, and created a narrative that couldn't be disputed. I rehearsed conversations with Stephen Kim, anticipating every argument my family's lawyer might make. And I drafted a statement that I'd release if necessary, one that laid out the truth without dramatics or accusations, just facts that spoke for themselves. Sunday evening, my mother called again. This time I answered. Diana, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you all weekend. I've been busy, I said neutrally. We need to talk about our conversation Friday night. I think you misunderstood our intentions. I understood perfectly. You're planning to sue me for ownership of my company based on the insurance coverage and occasional financial help you provided years ago. There was a long pause. That's not how I would characterize it. But it's accurate. We're your family, Diana. We're trying to protect you and help you navigate this transition. The tech world can be predatory, and you don't have experience with this level of success. Neither do you, I pointed out. You run a charity foundation, not a technology company. What expertise exactly are you offering? Her voice sharpened. Don't be condescending. Your father and I have been managing complex financial and legal matters since before you were born. Then you should understand why I have my own team of advisors. People I trust, who've been with me from the beginning. And you don't trust us? She said it like an accusation. I trust you to do what you think is best for the family's image. That's not the same as what's best for me or my company. I heard her take a breath, the kind she always took before delivering a statement she'd rehearsed. We're moving forward with our legal options, Diana. I'd hoped we could resolve this privately, but you're being unreasonable. Our lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday. My lawyer will be expecting the call, I said calmly. And Mom, you should know that I have complete documentation of everything ConnectWave has been built on. Financial records, investor agreements, incorporation documents. None of it includes you or Dad or Natalie. If you want to pursue this, we can let a judge review all the evidence and decide who's being unreasonable. Another pause, longer this time. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. That's what being independent means. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly as I set the phone down. The conversation had been inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. I'd just drawn a line in the sand with my own mother, and there was no erasing it now. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood. I met with Stephen Kim at 8, going through everything one final time. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Your position is strong, he said after reviewing my documents. We have clear proof of independent funding, separate business operations, and no written or verbal agreement establishing family ownership. Their claim relies entirely on moral arguments about family support, which don't hold up legally. What about the timing? I asked. The acquisition announcement goes public in an hour. That actually works in our favor. Once it's public knowledge, any legal action they take looks reactionary and opportunistic. It's harder to claim they were protecting family interests when they only filed after seeing the valuation. And if they go to the press? Then we release a statement with all supporting documentation. The facts speak for themselves, Diana. You built this company independently. They're trying to claim credit retroactively. No reasonable person will side with them once they see the evidence. I nodded, feeling some of the tension ease from my shoulders. All right. Let's do this. At 9 a.m. exactly, Claire sent out the press release. Tech startup ConnectWave acquired for $8.2 billion. Founder Diana Carter's vision revolutionizes social networking. My phone started buzzing immediately with notifications, messages from friends and former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years, all expressing shock and congratulations. And then, 10 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Natalie texted. We need to talk. Now. I didn't respond. My father sent an email with the subject line, "Please reconsider." I archived it without reading. By noon, the story was everywhere. Tech blogs, business news sites, even local Seattle media picked it up. The girl who'd been sitting at table 12, invisible and dismissed, was suddenly a billionaire tech founder. The narrative my family had been trying to control was already written, and their names weren't in it. Stephen Kim called at 2. Their lawyer just reached out. They're withdrawing the claim. I sat down slowly. They're what? Withdrawing. No lawsuit, no public statements. They're backing off completely. Why? He hesitated. This is speculation, but I think they realized they'd already lost the public relations battle. The story is out, and it's entirely about you and your achievement. If they file now, they're just a greedy family trying to cash in on their daughter's success. That's not the image Valerie Carter wants associated with her foundation. So it's over? The legal thread is over. The family dynamics, well, that's above my pay grade. I thanked him and ended the call, then sat in my quiet apartment trying to process what had just happened. I'd won. Not through confrontation or public drama, but through simple preparation and timing. They'd backed down because I'd made it clear I wouldn't, and because the truth was on my side. My phone rang again. Uncle Paul this time. I answered. I saw the news, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Congratulations, kid. You did it. They withdrew the claim, I told him. It's over. Of course they did. Valerie might be manipulative, but she's not stupid. She knows when she's beaten. I don't feel like I won anything, I admitted. I just feel tired. That's because you've been fighting this battle alone for years, not just this weekend. Give yourself time to process it. And Diana, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not because of the money or the success, but because you stood up for yourself. That's harder than building any company. We talked for a few more minutes before I let him go. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze of normalcy. I answered emails, took calls from my team, reviewed technical specifications like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The secret I'd been keeping was out, and my family's attempt to claim it had failed before it even began. That night, alone in my apartment with rain pattering against the windows, I finally let myself feel the weight of what had happened. The relief that I'd protected what I'd built. The sadness that my family had tried to take it. The strange emptiness that came with winning a battle I'd never wanted to fight. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from a number I didn't recognize at first, then realized was Natalie's. You could have included us. We're your family. I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. You could have been happy for me. That's what family does. I didn't wait for her reply. The notification came through at 6 a.m, jolting me awake from restless sleep. Forbes had published their article. Tech's newest billionaire built her empire in secret while family thought she was unemployed. The headline made my stomach clench, even though I'd known this moment was coming. I scrolled through the piece, which was surprisingly thorough, detailing ConnectWave's growth trajectory, the acquisition terms, and my background. They'd included a quote from the acquiring company's CEO praising my vision and technical innovation. What they hadn't included was any mention of my family, which felt like both a victory and a strange erasure. Valerie and Richard Carter would be waking up to this article, seeing their daughter's success framed entirely without them, and I could imagine my mother's expression as she realized how completely she'd been cut out of the narrative. My phone started ringing before I'd finished my coffee. Investors, journalists, former colleagues, everyone suddenly wanted a piece of the story. I let most of them go to voicemail, but when I saw Marcus's name, I answered. Have you seen Twitter? He asked, skipping any greeting. You're trending. I pulled up the app with my free hand and watched the feed populate with reactions. Most were congratulatory, celebrating another woman in tech breaking through. But there were other threads too. Speculation about why my family hadn't been mentioned, questions about my background and education. Someone had already dug up my LinkedIn profile and noted that I'd never listed a college degree. It's mostly positive, Marcus continued. But there are some people asking about your dropout status. Might want to get ahead of that narrative. I'll handle it, I said, though I had no idea how. The truth was complicated. I'd left business school because the professors were teaching outdated models while I was building something that would make their case studies obsolete. But explaining that without sounding arrogant was a challenge I hadn't prepared for. After hanging up with Marcus, I opened my laptop and started drafting a statement. Something authentic but professional, addressing the questions without feeding the controversy. But every version I wrote felt either too defensive or too casual, and I finally closed the document in frustration. Claire called at 8. We need to do interviews. I know you hate the attention, but silence right now looks like you're hiding something. Let me set up 3 or 4 carefully chosen conversations. Tech podcasts, maybe one business publication. You control the narrative by giving them the real story. What is the real story? I asked, genuinely uncertain. That I built a company while my family wasn't paying attention? That I deliberately kept it secret because I knew they'd try to take credit? The story is that you saw an opportunity, took a risk, and built something that 400 million people use every day. Everything else is just noise. She made it sound simple, but nothing about this felt simple. Still, she was right about one thing. The vacuum would get filled with speculation if I didn't fill it with facts. Set up the interviews, I told her. But only outlets that will let me tell the story properly. No ambush questions, no gotcha journalism. I'll vet them personally. Trust me, Diana. This is manageable. After we hung up, I forced myself to go through the normal routines. Shower, breakfast, checking in with my development team about a minor bug that had appeared overnight. The ordinary tasks felt grounding, reminding me that underneath all the media attention and family drama, I still had work to do. ConnectWave didn't stop needing maintenance just because everyone suddenly knew I'd built it. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes I'd catch myself staring at my phone, watching the reactions multiply and spread. Former classmates from the single year I'd spent at business school were posting congratulations that felt hollow, given that most of them had barely spoken to me when we were actually in the same room. People I'd worked with during my freelance days were claiming they'd always known I was destined for great things, conveniently forgetting the condescending comments about my lack of traditional credentials. The strangest messages came from extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, aunts and uncles, my grandmother's sister who I'd met exactly twice. All of them suddenly interested in reconnecting, sharing memories I didn't have, asking about getting together soon. The subtext was transparent enough that it made my skin crawl. Uncle Paul texted around 10. Your mother called me. She's furious about the Forbes article. Apparently several people at her foundation board meeting this morning brought it up, asking why she hadn't mentioned her daughter's success. She had no good answer. I could picture it perfectly. Valerie in her carefully chosen boardroom outfit, surrounded by other wealthy philanthropists, being confronted with evidence that her own family life wasn't as curated as her public image suggested. The embarrassment would sting worse than any financial loss. Is she blaming you for telling me about their plans? I asked. Probably. But I stopped caring what Valerie thinks of me about 20 years ago. How are you holding up? I'm okay. Just trying to figure out how to be a public person when I've spent 4 years being invisible. You don't owe anyone your whole story, Diana. Share what feels right and keep the rest private. That's not hiding, that's boundaries. His words settled something in me that had been churning since dawn. I didn't have to explain every choice or justify every decision. The company existed, the acquisition was real, and that was enough. The afternoon brought a different kind of intrusion. A reporter from the Seattle Times showed up at my apartment building, somehow having tracked down my address. My neighbor texted me a warning before I could walk into an ambush, and I ended up leaving through the basement parking garage like some kind of fugitive. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it weren't so invasive. I drove to Uncle Paul's place in Fremont, needing somewhere safe to think. He let me in without comment, setting up his spare room so I could work in peace. For the next several hours, I buried myself in code reviews and product roadmaps, letting the familiar logic of programming calm my racing thoughts. But reality kept intruding. An email from Natalie arrived around 3, longer and more detailed than her previous text. She'd written several paragraphs about family loyalty and shared success, about how my secrecy had hurt them and damaged trust. She claimed they'd only wanted to help, that their legal consultation had been about protecting me from predatory advisors, not claiming ownership. The revisionism was so blatant it would have been impressive if it weren't so insulting. I drafted 3 different responses before realizing that anything I said would just give her ammunition for further argument. Instead, I saved her email to a folder labeled documentation and moved on. If she wanted to rewrite history, I'd let her, but I'd keep the receipts showing what actually happened. Stephen Kim called at 4. I've been contacted by 2 different media outlets asking for comment on your family situation. I've declined on your behalf, but you should know the story is starting to expand beyond just the business acquisition. People are curious about the family angle. What are they asking specifically? Why your parents weren't mentioned in any of the announcements? Whether there's a rift in the family. One reporter asked directly if there had been a dispute over ownership. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temples. This was exactly what my mother had warned might happen, except she'd framed it as something I should prevent by cooperating with their demands. Now it was unfolding anyway, but on my terms instead of theirs. What do I say? I asked Stephen. Nothing, yet. Let them speculate. The moment you confirm family tensions, it becomes the story instead of your achievement. Right now you're a tech success. Don't let them reframe you as a family drama. He was right, but staying silent felt like letting my family control the narrative through absence. They could tell whatever story they wanted to their friends and foundation board members, and I'd have no rebuttal except refusing to engage. There is one thing you should consider, Stephen continued. Your family backed off the legal claim, but that doesn't mean they're done. If they think they're losing control of the public perception, they might try a different approach. Stay alert for any attempts to paint themselves as supportive parents who've been unfairly excluded. I'll watch for it, I promised. That evening, Uncle Paul made dinner while I sat at his kitchen table, finally going through all the messages and emails that had accumulated throughout the day. Most were congratulatory noise, but a few stood out. An invitation to speak at a Women in Tech conference. A request for an interview with a podcast I actually listened to. A message from my first angel investor, the one who'd believed in ConnectWave when it was nothing but a prototype and a pitch deck, saying he'd always known I'd do something extraordinary. That last one made my throat tight. Someone had believed in me when I was nobody, when I had nothing to offer except an idea and determination. That belief had mattered more than my family would ever understand. You should eat something, Paul said, setting a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs and toast, simple but exactly what I needed. I picked up a fork, suddenly realizing I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Thank you. For all of this. Letting me hide out here, dealing with my family fallout. You're not hiding, he corrected gently. You're regrouping. There's a difference. We ate in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. I've been thinking about something. Your mother's entire identity is built on control and perception. She needs to be seen as the architect of her family's success. That's why she's so angry about this. It's not really about money or ownership. It's about you succeeding in a way she can't take credit for. I'd known that on some level, but hearing it stated so plainly crystallized something. My success had disrupted her carefully constructed narrative, the one where she was the capable matriarch guiding her children toward appropriate achievements. I'd gone off script, built something she didn't understand in a field she couldn't dominate, and worst of all, I'd done it without asking permission. So what do? I asked. Just accept that we'll never have a real relationship? I think you accept that the relationship you wanted probably was never possible. Valerie doesn't know how to celebrate someone else's success without making it about herself. That's not your failing, Diana. It's hers. The words should have brought relief, but instead they just made me sad. Somewhere in my childhood, I'd stopped expecting my mother to be proud of me and started trying to just stay out of her way. I'd thought that was acceptance, but maybe it had just been giving up. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line made me sit up straighter. Statement from the Carter Family Foundation. I opened it, my pulse quickening as I read. The Carter Family Foundation is thrilled to celebrate the remarkable achievement of Diana Carter, daughter of Foundation founders Valerie and Richard Carter. Diana's success exemplifies the values of innovation, perseverance, and dedication that our family holds dear. We are proud to support her as she enters this exciting new chapter, and we look forward to exploring ways her groundbreaking work might align with our Foundation's mission of empowering future generations. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling my anger build with each pass. They'd done exactly what Stephen had warned about, inserted themselves into the narrative as proud, supportive parents while completely erasing the fact that they tried to claim ownership of my company days earlier. And that final sentence, about exploring alignment with their foundation, was a barely veiled suggestion that I should be donating significant portions of my acquisition proceeds to their charitable work. Paul read over my shoulder, his expression darkening. That's bold, even for Valerie. It's calculated, I said. Anyone who reads this will think they've been supportive all along. It makes me look ungrateful if I contradict it. So don't contradict it. Ignore it completely. The people who matter, your investors and team and actual supporters, they know the truth. Everyone else doesn't need to know the details of your family dynamics. But staying silent felt like letting them win in a different way. They'd rewritten history in an official statement, and my silence would be interpreted as confirmation. I needed something that set the record straight without descending into public family warfare. I pulled up a blank document and started typing, working through several drafts before landing on something that felt right. Clear and factual without being inflammatory. I appreciate my family's statement, though I want to clarify that ConnectWave was built entirely independently over the past 4 years. The company was self-funded initially and later supported by angel investors and venture capital firms who believed in the vision. I'm grateful for that support from the investment community, and I'm excited about what comes next. It was diplomatic enough to seem gracious while making it absolutely clear that my family had not been involved in any material way. I sent it to Stephen Kim for review, and he called back within 10 minutes. It's good. Professional, factual, doesn't invite further controversy. Do you want to release it as an official statement or give it to a reporter as a quote? Neither, I decided. Post it on my LinkedIn and Twitter. Let it be a direct communication, not filtered through anyone else. That works. Just be prepared for follow-up questions. I posted it before I could second-guess the decision, then immediately closed both apps before I could watch the reactions roll in. What mattered was that the truth was out there, available to anyone who cared to look for it. The next morning brought a new development. Natalie had posted a long Instagram story about family dynamics and supporting each other's dreams, complete with childhood photos of the two of us that I barely remembered being taken. She'd captioned them with vague inspirational phrases about sisterhood and shared journeys, managing to imply deep involvement in my success without explicitly claiming any. The comments section was full of people praising her for being such a supportive sister, asking what it was like watching me build ConnectWave, telling her she must be so proud. She'd responded to several, each answer carefully worded to suggest she'd been part of the journey without directly lying. It was masterful manipulation, and it made me furious. I called Claire. Natalie's doing damage control on social media, making it seem like we've been close this whole time. I saw. It's frustrating, but engaging with it just creates more drama. The best response is continued success. Let your work speak louder than her Instagram stories. She was right, but it didn't make it easier to watch my sister craft a false narrative in real time. I wondered how many people actually believed her, how many looked at those childhood photos and assumed they represented an ongoing relationship rather than ancient history. The interviews Claire had arranged started that afternoon. First was a tech podcast I'd listened to for years, hosted by a former developer who actually understood the technical challenges of scaling a platform. We talked about architecture decisions and growth strategies, about the moment I'd realized ConnectWave could be something bigger than a side project. It felt good to discuss the actual work rather than the surrounding drama. But even there, the family questions crept in. The host asked, carefully, about my background and education. I gave him the truth. I'd left business school because I was learning more from building than from studying, and that had been the right choice for me even if it looked risky at the time. Did your family support that decision? He asked. I hesitated, choosing words carefully. They had their concerns, like any parents would. But ultimately I had to follow my own path. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The compromise felt necessary, a way to acknowledge reality without turning the interview into a therapy session about family dysfunction. The second interview was with a business publication, more formal and focused on the acquisition itself. The journalist was sharp, asking pointed questions about valuation and market strategy. I found my rhythm discussing user metrics and engagement rates, the concrete data that proved ConnectWave's worth. This was where I was comfortable, in the numbers and analysis that didn't require navigating emotional landmines. But near the end, she asked the question I'd been dreading. There's been some speculation about tension with your family regarding the company's success. Can you address that? I gave her the same statement I'd posted online, then added something new. Building a company requires making difficult choices about where to focus your energy and who to include in various stages. I chose to keep my work separate from my family life, and that was the right decision for me and for ConnectWave's development. She pressed for more details, but I held firm, redirecting back to the product and the team that had helped build it. When the interview ended, I felt drained but satisfied. I'd acknowledged the reality without feeding the speculation, drawn a boundary without seeming defensive. Claire called that evening with unexpected news. "I've been approached by 3 separate organizations asking if you'd be interested in speaking at their events. 2 conferences and 1 university lecture series. All paying, all prestigious. Your profile is rising fast." The idea of public speaking made my stomach clench. I'd spent years avoiding attention, building my company in private specifically so I wouldn't have to perform for audiences. But I also understood that visibility had value now, that sharing my story might help other people who felt trapped by family expectations or traditional paths. "Let me think about it," I told Claire. "I'm not ready to commit to anything yet." "Take your time." "But Diana, this is good news. You're being recognized as a serious founder, not just a viral story." "That's exactly what we want." After hanging up, I sat on Uncle Paul's couch, processing everything that had happened in the 48 hours since the acquisition went public. My company was being acquired for billions. My family had tried and failed to claim ownership. The media was dissecting every aspect of my background and relationships. And now people wanted me to speak, to share my experience, to become some kind of symbol for succeeding against expectations. It was overwhelming and exhausting and not at all what I'd imagined when I'd first started coding ConnectWave in my tiny apartment at 2 in the morning. I just wanted to build something useful, to prove to myself that I could create value even without the credentials and connections my family valued so highly. Paul came home from his evening walk and found me staring at nothing, lost in thought. "You okay?" "I'm not sure what okay looks like anymore," I admitted. "Everything's changing so fast." "Change is uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean you're handling it wrong. You're allowed to feel uncertain." "I know. It's just hard to believe this is real sometimes. Last week I was the family disappointment. Now I'm a billionaire being asked to speak at conferences. How do you reconcile those 2 versions of yourself?" He sat down across from me, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe you don't reconcile them. Maybe you accept that other people's perception of you was always distorted, and now reality has forced them to see what was there all along. You haven't changed, Diana. You've just stopped being invisible." His words settled something in me, a truth I'd been circling without quite grasping. I hadn't transformed from failure to success overnight. I'd been building toward this for years while my family chose not to see it. Their surprise wasn't about my capabilities changing. It was about their awareness catching up to reality. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. First time he'd reached out directly since I'd ignored his email. "Can we talk? Just you and me. No lawyers, no agendas." I showed the message to Paul. "What do you think?" "I think he's trying to bypass your boundaries by appealing to your desire for connection. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't hear him out if you want to." I typed back slowly. "I'm willing to meet for coffee. Public place, no ambushes." His response came quickly. "Tomorrow morning. That place near the market you used to like. 10 o'clock. I'll be there." Setting the phone down, I felt a mix of curiosity and caution. My father had always been the passive parent, letting my mother lead while he followed. But he'd also been the one to warn me to leave the gala, the one who'd sent that cryptic text about them not stopping. Maybe he had something to say that was worth hearing, or maybe this was just another strategy. Either way, I'd find out tomorrow. That night I barely slept, running through possible conversations in my mind. What did Richard want? An apology? An explanation? A relationship rebuild, or just damage control for appearances? By the time morning arrived, I'd exhausted myself with speculation and decided to simply show up and listen. The coffee shop was a local place in Pike Place Market, tucked between a flower vendor and a cheese shop, always busy but never so crowded you couldn't have a conversation. I arrived 5 minutes early and claimed a corner table, ordering a black coffee I didn't really want but needed something to do with my hands. My father walked in exactly at 10, looking older than I remembered. His hair had more gray, and there were new lines around his eyes. He spotted me and offered a tentative smile that I didn't return, waiting to see what he'd do with this meeting he'd requested. He got his own coffee and joined me at the table, settling into the chair across from me with visible discomfort. "Thank you for coming. You said you wanted to talk. I'm listening." He wrapped his hands around his mug, not quite meeting my eyes. "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. For not standing up to your mother when she wanted to pursue that legal claim. For not telling you what was being planned. For years of not seeing what you were building because I wasn't paying attention." The words should have felt good, but they rang hollow somehow. Acknowledgement without change was just performance, and I'd seen enough of that from my family to recognize it. "Why now?" I asked. "Why apologize after everything's already public and settled?" "Because I didn't realize until it all came out how wrong I'd been about you. About what you were capable of. I let your mother's version of you become my version too, and that wasn't fair." "What was her version?" "That you were struggling. Directionless. That you'd never amount to much because you'd given up on traditional success." He finally looked at me directly. "I should have asked you what you were doing instead of assuming she was right." "Yeah, you should have." We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the market filtering through the shop's windows. Other people living normal lives, buying flowers and cheese and coffee, unaware that at this corner table a father and daughter were trying to figure out if their relationship could survive years of neglect and recent betrayal. "I don't know how to fix this, Diana," Richard said finally. "I know saying sorry isn't enough. But I want you to know I see you now. I see what you built and I'm genuinely impressed. Not as a parent trying to take credit, but as someone who understands how hard it is to build something from nothing. Then support me by leaving me alone," I said quietly. "Don't issue statements, don't try to insert yourself into the narrative, don't let mom use you as a proxy for her agenda. If you really see me and respect what I've built, prove it by backing off." He nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will do that. And tell her to stop too. The foundation statement, Natalie's Instagram stories, all of it. I built this independently because I knew you'd all try to claim it if you knew. I was right. So now that it's public and you can't take it, the least you can do is stop pretending you were involved." "That's fair," he said, though his expression suggested he wasn't sure he could actually enforce that with Valerie and Natalie. We talked for a few more minutes, surface topics about the acquisition and what came next, before I made my excuses and left. Walking back through the market, I felt no catharsis from the conversation. My father's apology had been real enough, but it didn't erase years of absence or the fact that he'd nearly let my mother sue me. Some damage couldn't be fixed with coffee shop conversations. But I'd drawn my boundaries clearly, and that felt like progress. Whether he honored them remained to be seen, but at least I'd stopped hoping for a relationship that didn't exist and started insisting on basic respect instead. It wasn't the family reconciliation movies promised, but it was honest, and maybe that was enough. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the acquisition announcement had turned my life inside out. The sender was someone named Jennifer Cho, and the subject line read simply, "Information you should see about Carter Foundation finances." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me pause. The email address was from a legitimate accounting firm in downtown Seattle, one I recognized from charity fundraiser programs. I opened the message carefully, half expecting some kind of phishing attempt. "Ms. Carter, I hope this message reaches you directly. My name is Jennifer Cho, and until last week I was the senior accountant for the Carter Family Foundation. I resigned after discovering financial irregularities that I believe you should be aware of, particularly given recent public statements about family support and values. I have documentation if you're willing to meet. My contact information is below." I read it 3 times, my coffee going cold on the desk beside me. Financial irregularities at my mother's foundation. The organization she'd built her entire public identity around, the source of her social capital and influence in Seattle's philanthropic circles. Whatever Jennifer Cho had found, it was serious enough to make her quit and reach out to me specifically. I forwarded the email to Stephen Kim before responding, waiting for his assessment. He called within an hour. "This could be significant," he said without preamble. "If there are actual financial problems at the foundation, it changes the power dynamic considerably. But you need to be careful. Meeting with a former employee who's making allegations could be seen as you trying to undermine your family. Or it could be me doing due diligence about an organization that's been publicly connecting itself to my success," I countered. "They issued that statement claiming I exemplify their values. If their values include financial misconduct, I should know about it." "Fair point. If you meet with her, do it with me present. And record the conversation with her permission. We want documentation of everything." I called Jennifer Cho from Stephen's office that afternoon, putting her on speaker so my attorney could listen. She had a precise, professional voice that immediately inspired confidence. "Thank you for responding, Ms. Carter. I wasn't sure you would. Your email was pretty compelling," I said. "Can you tell me what you found?" She took a breath, and I could hear papers rustling on her end. "I've worked for the foundation for 6 years. My job was to manage the general ledger, process donations, handle disbursements to the charitable programs. Everything was straightforward until about 18 months ago, when Mrs. Carter asked me to start routing certain expenses through different categories." "What kind of expenses?" "Personal ones. Luxury travel that was classified as site visits to charitable programs. Designer clothing purchases listed as event expenses. There was a kitchen renovation at the family estate last year that was somehow categorized as foundation infrastructure improvement. Individually, each item could potentially be justified with creative accounting. But taken together, it's a pattern of using charitable funds for personal benefit." My stomach tightened. "That's fraud." "Yes, it is." I raised concerns with Mrs. Carter multiple times. She assured me everything was approved by the board, that I was misunderstanding the nature of legitimate business expenses. "But I've been doing this work for 15 years, Ms. Carter. I know the difference between a reasonable cost of doing business and systematic misappropriation of funds." Stephen leaned forward, his expression sharp. "Ms. Cho, do you have documentation of these expenses and your communications with Mrs. Carter?" "I have everything. Spreadsheets showing the expense categories, copies of receipts with handwritten notes indicating the actual purpose, emails where I questioned specific items. When I told Mrs. Carter I was going to request a formal board audit, she offered me a severance package contingent on signing an NDA. I refused and resigned instead." "Why are you bringing this to Diana?" Stephen asked. "Why not report it to the IRS or the state attorney general?" "Because I wanted her to know what kind of people she's dealing with before I do report it. Her family has been making public statements about values and integrity while privately stealing from charitable donations. She deserves to understand the full picture." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. My mother had spent decades building her reputation as a philanthropic leader, sitting on boards and hosting galas and positioning herself as a pillar of the community. And underneath it all, she'd been treating the foundation like her personal bank account. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "if you share this documentation with me, what happens next?" "I file a report with the appropriate authorities. The foundation will be audited. If the findings confirm what I've documented, there will be consequences. Criminal charges, most likely, and certainly the end of the foundation's credibility." "And you're okay with that? Destroying the organization you worked for?" "I'm okay with stopping fraud," she said firmly. "The foundation's mission is important. It helps people who genuinely need support. But it can't continue operating as a vehicle for personal enrichment disguised as charity." Stephen and I exchanged glances. He gave a small nod, leaving the decision to me. "I'd like to see the documentation," I said. "Can we meet tomorrow?" We set up a meeting for the next morning at Stephen's office. After Jennifer hung up, I stayed in my chair, staring at nothing while my mind raced through implications. "This changes everything," Stephen said quietly. "If you have proof of financial misconduct at the foundation, your mother's credibility collapses. Any narrative she's trying to build about family values and supporting your success becomes laughable. I don't want to destroy her, I said, surprised by the truth of it. I just want her to leave me alone. Sometimes those are the same thing. If she knows you have this information, it becomes leverage. She backs off completely or you go public with evidence that her foundation is corrupt. That feels like blackmail. It's called mutually assured destruction, and it's how you protect yourself when someone more powerful is trying to control you. She tried to take your company. This ensures she can't try again. I went home that evening feeling sick. Discovering my family's legal maneuvering had been one thing. This was darker, a fundamental corruption that affected people beyond our immediate conflict. Donors who'd written checks believing their money would help others, program recipients who depended on legitimate charitable work. My mother hadn't just betrayed me. She'd betrayed everyone who trusted her. Uncle Paul called around 8. I heard you met with Jennifer Cho. News travels fast, I said, not bothering to ask how he knew. Small world in nonprofit accounting circles. Is it as bad as she suggested? Worse, probably. I'm seeing the full documentation tomorrow. He was quiet for a moment. Diana, what are you going to do with this information? I don't know yet. Part of me wants to pretend I never learned about it. Let her keep her foundation and her reputation as long as she stays away from me. And the other part? Thinks that people who steal from charities deserve to face consequences, even if they're related to me. Both impulses are valid. But you should know that Valerie's not going to take this lying down. If she finds out you have this information, she'll spin it somehow. Make herself the victim, claim you're trying to ruin her out of spite. Let her try. I have documentation from her own accountant. That's not spite, that's evidence. We talked for a while longer before I let him go, but sleep was impossible. I kept thinking about all those gala attendees writing checks, my mother accepting them with gracious smiles while planning how to redirect the money toward her personal expenses. The hypocrisy was staggering. The next morning, Jennifer Cho arrived at Stephen's office with 2 expandable file folders and a thumb drive. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with an efficiency in her movements that spoke to her accounting background. I've organized everything chronologically, she said, spreading documents across Stephen's conference table. Here are the general ledger entries showing expenses that don't align with foundation mission. Here are the actual receipts showing what was purchased. And here are my email exchanges with Mrs. Carter questioning these expenditures. I picked up a receipt at random. A handbag from a luxury boutique, price tag $3,200, categorized as materials for donor appreciation gifts. But the handwritten note in the margin, in what I recognized as my mother's handwriting, said, "Personal, reimburse foundation later." Did she ever reimburse it? I asked. Not that I could find. That's the pattern across dozens of transactions. She'd mark something as personal with apparent intent to pay it back, then simply never did. Over 18 months, it adds up to approximately $420,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Nearly $500,000, stolen from people who thought they were helping others. I felt Stephen tense beside me, his legal mind already calculating implications and consequences. We spent 2 hours going through everything. Travel expenses that put my mother and Natalie in luxury resorts nowhere near any foundation programs. The kitchen renovation that had somehow been justified as necessary for hosting donor meetings, except the receipts showed high-end appliances for personal use. Even some of Natalie's marketing agency fees had been inflated, the extra amount kicked back in ways that Jennifer's paper trail made obvious. "This is airtight," Stephen said finally. Any auditor would immediately flag this as misappropriation. "Miss Cho, you're certain about filing the report?" "Completely certain. I've already drafted it. I'm meeting with an attorney from the state charity division next week. But I wanted Ms. Carter to have this information first." "Why?" I asked again, still not quite understanding her motivation. "Because when your family issued that statement about your success reflecting their values, it made me sick. I've watched your mother build a public image based on generosity and community service while privately treating charitable funds as her personal account. You achieved something real and legitimate, and they're trying to co-opt it to cover their own corruption. That's not right. Her anger was obvious and oddly comforting. At least someone else saw the situation clearly. After Jennifer left, Stephen and I sat in his office discussing options. The most straightforward path was to do nothing, let Jennifer file her report and let the investigation proceed independently. But that felt passive, like I was just watching events unfold rather than making conscious choices. You could use this as leverage, Stephen said carefully. Inform your mother that you're aware of the financial issues and that you'll stay quiet only if she signs an agreement completely severing any claim to your work or success. No more public statements, no more attempts to associate herself with Connect Wave. And if she refuses? Then Jennifer's report proceeds and you cooperate with the investigation if asked. Either way, your mother's ability to control the narrative ends. I thought about it for a long time, weighing options that all felt complicated and messy. Finally, I made a decision that felt right even if it wasn't easy. Set up a meeting with her attorney, I said. Just the lawyers, not the family members. Lay out what we know and what the consequences will be if she doesn't back off permanently. Give her a choice, but make it clear the choice is final. Stephen nodded, already making notes. I'll reach out today. This should be resolved within the week. I drove home through afternoon traffic, my hands tight on the steering wheel. Part of me felt guilty for using Jennifer's information as leverage. But a larger part recognized that my mother had put herself in this position through her own choices. I wasn't creating the consequences. I was just refusing to protect her from them. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. We need to talk. About Mom and the foundation. Today. So she already knew something was wrong. Either my mother had told her about the financial problems, or word had leaked somehow. Either way, the situation was accelerating. I'm not available today, I typed back. This is important, Diana. Family important. Then it can wait until our attorneys arrange a proper meeting. I'm done with ambush conversations. I blocked her number before she could respond, feeling a strange liberation in that simple action. For years, I'd accepted their intrusions and demands, always available when they decided they needed something from me. Not anymore. Uncle Paul called an hour later. Valerie knows something's up. She called me asking if I'd heard anything about problems at the foundation. I told her I don't involve myself in her business. Did she say anything specific? Just that there were some accounting questions and she was handling it. But she sounded rattled, Paul. I've never heard her sound uncertain before. Good, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence. She should be uncertain. She should be worried. Stephen arranged the meeting for the following Monday, giving everyone time to prepare. He'd be representing me, while my mother would be represented by Gregory Walsh, the same attorney who'd advised her on claiming ownership of my company. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The weekend passed in a strange suspended state. I worked on Connect Wave transition planning, coordinated with the acquisition team about integration timelines, went through the motions of my professional life while personally feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Saturday afternoon, a flower delivery arrived at my apartment. 24 white roses with a card in my mother's handwriting. We should talk before involving more lawyers. Please call me. I threw them away without responding, then immediately felt guilty for wasting perfectly good flowers. But accepting them felt like accepting an opening for manipulation, another attempt to bypass boundaries and control the conversation. Sunday evening, my father texted. Your mother is very upset. Whatever you're planning, please reconsider. We're still family. Family doesn't steal from charities, I typed back. Family doesn't try to take credit for work they didn't do. I'm done pretending those things are acceptable just because we share DNA. He didn't respond, and I didn't expect him to. Richard had spent his whole marriage avoiding conflict, and he wasn't going to start standing up to Valerie now. Monday morning arrived with heavy rain, the kind that turned Seattle streets into rivers and made everyone irritable. I met Stephen at his office an hour before the scheduled meeting, running through our strategy one final time. "We present the evidence of financial misconduct," he said. "We make clear that this information will be shared with authorities if your mother doesn't agree to a complete separation from your business and public life. No more statements, no more social media references, no more attempts to associate the foundation with your success. And if she agrees? Then we provide a brief window before the report is filed, giving her a chance to potentially address the financial issues internally. But Jennifer's report is going forward regardless. We're just offering a heads up, not silence." The meeting started at 10 sharp. Gregory Walsh arrived first, looking less confident than he had in previous interactions. He set up his materials at the conference table without his usual pleasantries, a sign that he knew this wasn't going to go well for his client. My mother entered 5 minutes later, and the change in her was striking. She was still impeccably dressed, still carrying herself with that careful poise she'd perfected over decades. But there was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that betrayed her worry. She looked at me across the conference table, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine fear. Not fear of me specifically, but fear of losing control, of watching her carefully constructed world collapse. "Thank you for meeting," Gregory began, his tone professionally neutral. "My client is concerned about some rumors regarding the foundation's finances." "They're not rumors," Stephen replied flatly. "They're documented instances of misappropriation of charitable funds. We have receipts, ledger entries, and testimony from your former senior accountant detailing a pattern of using foundation money for personal expenses." He slid a folder across the table. Gregory opened it, his face paling as he scanned the first few pages. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, but I saw her throat move as she swallowed hard. "These are serious allegations," Gregory said carefully. "My client denies any intentional wrongdoing." "The documentation says otherwise," Stephen continued. "What we're here to discuss is how this situation gets resolved. Our position is simple. Mrs. Carter signs an agreement completely separating herself from any claims to or associations with Diana's business ventures. No more public statements, no more social media posts, no more attempts to connect her foundation's work with Diana's success. In exchange, we provide advance notice before this information is shared with regulatory authorities." "That sounds like blackmail," Gregory said, though his heart wasn't in the objection. "It's called negotiation. Your client tried to claim ownership of my client's company through false pretenses. Now we've discovered she's been misusing charitable funds. We're offering her a way to contain the damage to the foundation investigation only, rather than having both issues become public simultaneously." My mother finally spoke, her voice strained. "Diana, surely we can discuss this privately. Family to family." "We're not family in any way that matters," I said, hearing my own voice come out colder than I'd intended. "You tried to steal my company. You've been stealing from charity donors. You've spent my entire life treating me like a disappointment while using any success I achieved as something to exploit. I'm done. I raised you. Supported you. You housed me for 18 years because that's what parents are legally required to do. Everything I built as an adult, I built despite you, not because of you. And now you're going to sign an agreement that makes it official, or you're going to deal with an IRS investigation into your foundation while everyone who ever donated learns how you spent their money." The room fell silent except for rain hammering against the windows. My mother looked at Gregory, who gave a small, defeated shrug. The evidence was overwhelming, and they both knew it. What exactly would this agreement entail? Gregory asked finally. Stephen pulled out a prepared document. Complete cessation of any public statements connecting Diana Carter to the Carter Family Foundation or to Valerie and Richard Carter's charitable work. Removal of any existing social media posts or press releases making such connections. No further attempts to claim involvement in or support of Diana's business ventures. And a stipulation that these terms are permanent and binding. And in exchange? Gregory pressed. We delay sharing this documentation with authorities for 30 days, giving Mrs. Carter time to potentially address the financial discrepancies internally before they become subject to outside investigation. Though we should be clear, our source intends to file her report regardless. We're simply offering advance notice. My mother's composure finally cracked. 30 days isn't enough time to fix 18 months of expenses. Then you'll have to explain that to the investigators, Stephen said without sympathy. These are the terms. Take them or leave them. Gregory requested a private consultation with his client, and Stephen and I stepped out into the hallway. Rain streaked the windows at the end of the corridor, and I watched it while trying to process what had just happened. I'd confronted my mother with evidence of her corruption and demanded she stay out of my life permanently. It felt both empowering and devastating. You did well in there, Stephen said quietly. I know that wasn't easy. It was necessary, I replied. That's different from easy. They called us back in after 15 minutes. My mother looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way I'd never seen before. Gregory had several handwritten notes in front of him, suggested modifications to the agreement that Stephen shot down one by one. Finally, we reached a version that both sides could accept. My mother signed it without looking at me, her signature tight and controlled on the document that formally severed any public connection between us. Gregory countersigned as witness, and Stephen made copies for everyone. The financial documentation will be shared with the State Charity Division in 30 days, Stephen confirmed. What you do with that time is up to you, but I'd suggest being proactive rather than reactive. We left the building without any further conversation. I'd gone in as someone being attacked by her family and come out holding all the leverage. The reversal should have felt triumphant, but instead I just felt tired. Stephen walked me to my car, holding an umbrella over both of us against the rain. How are you doing? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. I keep waiting to feel guilty about using the foundation information against her. Do you feel guilty? I considered the question honestly. Not really. Just sad that it came to this. That's a healthy response. You protected yourself without attacking unnecessarily. That's harder than it sounds. I drove home through the storm, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. My phone stayed silent, no calls from my mother or Natalie or my father. The agreement had drawn a clear line, and apparently they were respecting it, at least for now. Uncle Paul called that evening. I heard the meeting happened. How'd it go? It's over. She signed an agreement to stay out of my life, and in 30 days the foundation gets investigated for financial fraud. He let out a long breath. I won't pretend I'm not relieved. Valerie needed to face consequences. But I know this can't be easy for you. It's not. But it's right. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, he said gently. You can do the right thing and still grieve what you wish your family had been. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. I'd won every battle with my family. Protected my company, exposed their financial corruption, forced them to acknowledge my independence. But the cost was any remaining hope of a genuine relationship, any fantasy that we might somehow become the family I'd wanted as a child. That night, I deleted the childhood photos I'd been keeping on my phone. Not out of anger, but out of acceptance. Those images represented people who didn't really exist anymore, if they ever had. My mother wasn't a flawed but loving parent. She was someone who'd systematically tried to control and exploit me. My sister wasn't a potential ally who just needed time to see me clearly. She was an active participant in every attempt to diminish my achievements. Letting go of who I'd wished they were meant accepting who they actually were. And that acceptance, painful as it was, felt like freedom. The news broke exactly 30 days later, just as Jennifer Cho had promised. State regulators investigate Carter Family Foundation for financial irregularities. The headline appeared in the Seattle Times business section, carefully worded but damning in its implications. Within hours, every local news outlet had picked up the story, and by evening it had spread to national coverage. I was in San Francisco when it happened, meeting with the acquisition team about integration timelines. My phone started buzzing during a presentation about user migration protocols, and I had to excuse myself to deal with the avalanche of messages. Reporters wanted comment. Former donors wanted explanations. People I'd gone to high school with suddenly remembered we'd been friends and wanted to know the inside story. I turned off my phone and went back to the meeting, focusing on server architecture and data privacy protocols, the concrete technical challenges that had always made more sense to me than family dynamics. When we broke for lunch, Claire pulled me aside. Your mother's attorney issued a statement. Valerie Carter is cooperating fully with investigators and is confident that any accounting discrepancies will be resolved satisfactorily. They're trying to make it sound like a clerical error. Let them spin it however they want, I said. The investigation will find what it finds. And when reporters ask you about it, I refer them to my previous statement that I built my company independently and had no involvement with the foundation's operations. That's the truth, and it's all I need to say. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, I watched from a distance as my mother's carefully constructed world slowly crumbled. Board members resigned. Major donors pulled their support. The local society pages that had once featured glowing profiles of Valerie Carter's philanthropic leadership now ran carefully neutral pieces about the importance of nonprofit transparency. Natalie went quiet on social media, her Instagram account that had once posted daily updates about family unity and shared success going dormant. My father, true to form, said nothing publicly and apparently nothing privately either, at least not to me. Uncle Paul kept me updated on the family fallout, though I'd stopped asking for details. Valerie had hired a crisis management firm. They'd brought in forensic accountants to review everything before the state investigators could. The foundation had been suspended from accepting new donations pending the audit results. Does it feel like justice? Paul asked me during one of our weekly dinners. It feels like consequences, I said. I'm not sure that's the same thing. The acquisition closed in December, a cold gray morning where I signed documents that transferred ConnectWave to its new parent company while securing my financial future for several lifetimes. The celebration was muted, a small gathering of the core team who'd built the platform with me, people who understood what it meant to create something from nothing. Marcus raised a glass of champagne in the conference room we'd rented for the occasion. To Diana, who proved that the best revenge is building something so successful they can't ignore you. Everyone laughed, but the words hit differently than he'd intended. I hadn't built ConnectWave as revenge. I'd built it because I saw a problem that needed solving, because I loved the challenge of creating elegant code that scaled beautifully, because working at 3 a.m. on something I believed in felt more meaningful than any conventional career path. The fact that my success had exposed my family's failures was almost incidental. Almost, but not entirely. The state investigation concluded in February with findings that surprised no one who'd seen Jennifer Cho's documentation. The foundation had systematically misappropriated $437,000 over 18 months. Criminal charges were filed against my mother for fraud and embezzlement. The foundation was dissolved, its remaining legitimate assets distributed to other charities serving similar missions. Valerie Carter, once a fixture of Seattle's philanthropic scene, was now facing up to 5 years in prison. I felt nothing when I read the charging documents. No satisfaction, no vindication, not even pity. Just a distant acknowledgement that actions had consequences and she'd chosen her actions knowing the risks. My father called for the first time in months. The number appeared on my screen, and I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Diana, he said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I know I have no right to ask, but your mother's attorney thinks character references might help during sentencing. If you could write something, even just a few lines about her charitable work before the problem started. I hung up without responding, then blocked his number. Some bridges weren't worth maintaining, and some requests were too absurd to dignify with refusal. Spring arrived with unexpected gentleness, cherry blossoms blooming along the streets near my new apartment in Queen Anne. I'd moved out of Capitol Hill after the acquisition, wanting a fresh start in a neighborhood where no reporters had tracked down my address. The new place had views of the Sound and enough space for a proper home office, though I was working less now that the company had transitioned to new ownership. Claire had been right about the speaking invitations. I'd accepted 3 carefully chosen opportunities, talking to students at the University of Washington about unconventional career paths, sharing technical insights at a Women in Tech conference, doing a podcast interview about building products that solved real problems rather than chasing trends. Each time I spoke, I talked about the work itself. The challenges of scaling infrastructure, the importance of user privacy in social platforms, the satisfaction of solving complex technical problems. I didn't mention my family except when directly asked, and then only to say that I'd chosen to build independently because that's what felt right for the project. People seemed to understand without needing all the details spelled out. Uncle Paul and I had dinner every Thursday, a routine that had started during the crisis and continued because we both enjoyed it. He'd become something like the parent I'd wished for, supportive without being controlling, proud without needing to take credit. Over Thai food one evening, he asked what came next. "You've got more money than you'll ever spend. The company's successfully transitioned. You're not even 30 yet. What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" I'd been thinking about that question a lot lately. The answer surprised me with its simplicity. I want to build something else. Not for acquisition or profit, but just to see if I can solve another interesting problem. Maybe something in education technology, making programming accessible to people who don't have traditional computer science backgrounds. Sounds like you've given this thought. I have. Success is supposed to be the destination, right? But for me it's just confirmation that I can do the work. So I want to keep doing the work. He smiled, the kind of smile that said he understood completely. My mother was sentenced in May to 18 months in federal prison, with 3 years probation following release. The judge noted that while the amounts involved were serious, this appeared to be a first offense and there was potential for rehabilitation. Valerie Carter, who'd spent decades cultivating an image of unimpeachable integrity, was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. I learned about it from a news alert on my phone. I was in a coffee shop in Fremont, working on preliminary designs for the education platform, when the notification appeared. I read the article once, then archived it and went back to my code. Natalie tried to reach out once more after the sentencing, a long email about family and forgiveness and how we needed each other during difficult times. I read it carefully, looking for any genuine acknowledgement of her role in everything that had happened. There was none, just more requests for me to be the bigger person and help hold the family together. I deleted it without responding. Summer brought new possibilities. The education platform I'd been sketching was taking real shape, and I'd started conversations with potential collaborators who shared my vision. There was no pressure to monetize quickly or scale aggressively. Just the pure pleasure of building something useful. On a clear June evening, I found myself at a rooftop gathering for tech founders, the kind of networking event I'd always avoided before. But something had shifted. I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't constantly worried about someone discovering what I was working on or judging my unconventional path. A woman approached me, someone I recognized from her company's recent IPO announcement. "You're Diana Carter, right? I loved reading about ConnectWave's architecture. That scaling solution you implemented was brilliant." We talked for 30 minutes about technical challenges and design philosophies, and not once did she ask about my family or the foundation scandal or any of the drama that had dominated headlines. She just wanted to discuss the work, founder to founder. Walking home that night, I realized I'd finally become the person I'd been building toward all along. Not defined by my family's expectations or their failures, not fighting for recognition or defending my choices. Just someone who built things that mattered and surrounded herself with people who valued the same things. My phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Paul. "Saw a great quote today and thought of you. The best revenge is massive success. But the best life is building something meaningful regardless of whether anyone's watching." I smiled and typed back. "Working on both. See you Thursday." The city lights spread out below as I walked, millions of people living their own complicated stories, fighting their own battles, building their own versions of success. My story had included betrayal and conflict and painful choices about family loyalty versus self-preservation. But it had also included 400 million people connecting through something I'd created, technologies I'd developed solving real problems, and the freedom to wake up each morning and choose what came next based solely on what felt meaningful to me. That wasn't revenge. It was simply living well on my own terms, and that turned out to be enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.